This is the interior of San Miniato al Monte, a view facing the east. The diaphragm arches inside are an unusual feature. These transverse arches served three major functions. First, they compartmentalize the interior, as is typical of Romanesque architecture. Secondly, these arches brace what were high, thin walls. And third, and also very important, is they provided for a fire break. This is the interior of Saint Pierre from Angoulême, France, 12th century. And we can see a Byzantine influence in Romanesque architecture with the domes that were used frequently in southern France, as is seen here in Saint Pierre. Here's the plan of Saint Pierre, and the plan reveals it to be a fusion of many ideas. The square schematism of the Romanesque, the early Christian basilica design, and the Byzantine use of domes. Now, big buildings beget large stone sculpture. If nothing else, Romanesque art is of great significance in that it brought about a return of stone sculpture which practically disappeared during the 8th and 9th centuries in Europe. Early on, the stone sculpture decorating the churches was not highly integrated. This may be due in no small part to the fact that artists were in a sense preoccupied with relearning this craft and felt this problem had to be addressed first. Now, church portals became the major focal point of sculptures, reflecting this religious significance of the church, as well as being a prime display space. The diagram of a typical Romanesque portal can be seen in your textbook, and we'll find that practically all of the parts of a Romanesque portal will be used for sculpture. Be prepared to identify these parts by name and function where appropriate on a future test. This is Christ in Majesty with Apostles. It's a lintel over a doorway at Saint Genis de Fontaine in France from around 1019 to 1020. It's marble and it's 24 inches high. Now, Christ in Majesty with Apostles is a marble carved lintel over a doorway. Note that while integrated into the architectural form, this sculpture still is called First Romanesque because of the squat proportions and the manner in which the relief is used, only to mark off each individual figure in shallow relief, with details being added by incision. The figures to the right actually look like bowling pins to me, so very odd in terms of the articulation of the figure. Early Christian influences are still very strong here. This is the tympanum of the south portal of Saint Pierre from Moissac, France, 1115 to 1135. The diameter of this portal is 16.5 feet. Now, the tympanum of Saint Pierre differs greatly from the previous slide. First, in that it's much larger. Second, it's far more natural. Third, the figures are carved in high relief. That is, they're projecting by at least half their depth from the background. And fourth, the figures are far more active. Fifth, they feature better proportions. And sixth, they're much better integrated into the architectural form. 100 years goes a long way toward defining the full Romanesque style. We're creeping back toward completing a circle that started with the Greco-Roman tradition of naturalism that was lost in early Christian art. Now, even with the improvements made over the first Romanesque style, these figures are still far from ideal. Nevertheless, the expression of these figures through their distortion goes a long way toward moving art away from being read merely as symbol, as was characteristic of early Christian art. This is the trumeau of the south portal, St. Pierre. Now, the trumeau of the prophet Jeremiah or Isaiah defines one sculptural characteristic of Romanesque art, that of the elongation of the figures. A feeling of elegance and unity with the architectural form results in this work, which combines elements of the first Romanesque style with the more fully developed Romanesque style. The lion figures here are the result of many different cultures associating the animal form with architecture. Now, where else have we seen animals used in combination with architecture? We've seen it in the Lion's Gate, the Lamassu, etc. Here's a detail of the head of Jeremiah or Isaiah. And of particular interest here is the use of incised lines in the drapery and the beard, and that recalls the treatment that we saw of our bowling pin figures earlier. This is the Last Judgment by Gislibertus. It's the West Tympanum at Autun Cathedral from around 1130 to 1135. Now, in the West Tympanum of Saint Lazare in Autun, France, we see the artist Gislibertus put an end to the cool detachment of figures within a narrative sculptural context. Compared with early Christian depictions of the scene, Gislibertus's version seems more in keeping with that of Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, done nearly 400 years later. Both Gislibertus and Bosch forcefully express a lasting terror in their images. The inscription to this sculpture reads as follows: "Let this terror appall all those bound by earthly sin." I think the right side of the image speaks well for the inscription and raises perhaps a pertinent question for the religious today. Are they more afraid of their boss or their God? An ironic aspect of the work is the fact that the master stone cutter or carver took great pains to identify himself. Perhaps not the thing to do in light of the inscription. Anyway, Gislibertus gives us a push to the idea of the fine artist, one who wishes his works to be long known in his name. A novel concept then, but one soon to become common. Now, even the capitals in Romanesque art frequently provided a spot for narrative, reliefs. Here's Gislibertus's Dream of the Magi, the nave capital from Autun Cathedral, from 1120 to 1132. And utterly beautiful in its simplicity is the Dream of the Magi. Where an angel appears and touches the hand of the third Magi, we can feel him opening his eyes. Now, how is the meaning of the scene made clear? Let me ask you this question. How many people sleep with their crowns on? This is Gislibertus's Flight into Egypt, the nave capital from Autun Cathedral, 1120 to 1132. The Flight into Egypt is what I find to be an amusing look at the infancy of Christ. The scale is rather peculiar, as Christ appears to be an infant with adult features. Best of all are the wheels which seem to move everyone down the path. Gisli seemed quite sensitive to the needs of each scene that he depicted or sculpted. One of the best scenes shows Eve slithering on her stomach through foliage, reaching for the apple, and seeming to call out to Adam. Is she Eve, or a personification of someone else then? Gisli is great at changing his voice as the situation merits. That's not something every artist can pull off. Now, not all Romanesque sculpture approaches the radical expression of Gisli. This is the portal on the west facade of Saint-Trophime in Arles, France, late 12th century. Now here the portal from Saint-Trophime in Arles, home of Van Gogh some 700 years later, displays a far different sensibility, one that draws heavily on the art of antiquity. The front bays of the portals depict the figures of saints, who display a solemnity quite different from the animated poses and expressions of previous Romanesque work. This can also be seen as resurrecting the classical tradition in terms of the dress of the figures. Like Romanesque architecture, the sculpture of this period tends to be quite varied, not unusual in what amounts to the flowering of a new age. We're going to look now at Romanesque painting, illumination, and etc. And within this category of 2D art, we'll look at the Bayeux tapestry. Not actually a tapestry, it's embroidered wool on linen, 20 inches high, and running a length of about 77 yards, nearly a football field. This is the Battle of Hastings, a detail from that tapestry dating from around 1073 to 1083. Again, wool embroidery on linen, 20 inches high. And the tapestry depicts the Norman defeat of the Anglo-Saxons at Hastings in 1066. This is a remarkable secular survivor from this period of art. As pictorial narrative, it's closely related to the development of literary epics and is unique in that it depicts a contemporary or modern event in a world where art was done almost entirely in the service of religion. While the figures are quite flat, it is modern in that the figures overlap and are seen in motion. In addition to recording the battle, other contemporary events were depicted, such as the appearance of Halley's Comet, and a tale of a scandal involving a clerk. Why not? You've got 77 yards to cover. The Romanesque illuminations are remarkable paintings of great color, design, and narrative. Brilliant color and expressive figures reveal a joy of painting that's not immediately apparent perhaps in sculpture, architecture, and tapestries, all of which require great planning. The immediacy of the painting media makes it one of great experimentation. This is St. John the Evangelist from the Gospel book of Abbot Wadricius, dating from around 1147. It's tempera on vellum, 14 by 9.5 inches. Now, this image of St. John recalls metalworking techniques of early medieval art and Byzantine modes of abstraction in drapery. At the same time, new concepts in terms of vibrant color were being explored, as well as magnificent design techniques of combining the main image with figures of lesser importance. This use of color, if not the schematized figures of Romanesque art, will signal an interest in brilliant color characteristic of the pre-Renaissance period of Giotto. And this concludes our look at Romanesque art and architecture.